Hey, y'all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be joining us from in the world today. My name is Meg Alexander. I'm part of Power to Fly's virtual hosting team, and I could not be more excited to be hosting yet another fabulous Power to Fly Chat and Learn event. Now, before we dive in and get started, I just want to go over some real quick housekeeping items, especially important if maybe this is your first event with Power to Fly, in which case, hi, welcome. We're so happy to meet you. Or maybe you just haven't joined us for an event in a while. And if that's the case, welcome back. We're so happy to see you again. So big thing to know during these events is that we encourage participation. If you would like to, you are very welcome to come off mute, to turn your cameras on, share your smiling, maskless faces with us safely. There is no need to be Instagram perfect, y'all. We do not care if you are in a three-piece suit or your bathrobe. You could be joining us from your living room couch or the corner office. It makes no difference to us. We want to be there to meet you where you are. So please feel free to show up with, 3-day dry shampoo messy buns, furry coworkers. If you've got a little baby supervisor in charge of you today, please feel free to show up with that as well. We just want to be here to meet you where you are. Now, we are recording today's session. What that means for you is that you don't have to take notes. You get to sit back, you get to relax, and enjoy the conversation that Gus and I are about to have. Now, you can always rewatch this recording. We're going to send y'all a link in about 2 business days, and that'll have a link to where you can rewatch the recording on our website. But let's say that Gus shares something that is just like mind-blowing, paradigm shifting. You cannot wait to share it with a friend or coworker or relative. You don't have to wait 1 to 2 business days to do that. You can always head over to our YouTube channel. The video is posted there, usually within about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of the live stream. And you could always check it out there. We have a huge section of our archive chats available on our YouTube channel. I'll share links for all of this with you in the chat box in just a little bit. But you can always, head over there, check out a huge list of our archive chats. But the real, the absolute, gold, what am I trying to think of? Reward, gold, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Thank you. That is going to be found on our website. On our website, you have access to all of our archives, everything that's happened from the beginning of Chat and Learns through now. You can watch any and all of those, share as much as you'd like, all that good stuff for free. So if you have any questions about that, you can always write it in the chat, or if you have any further questions, you can always email us hi@powertofly.com. Now, last but not least, I want to encourage y'all to ask questions. Let us know what you're thinking as we go through this session. To encourage y'all and kind of rip the Band-Aid off so that y'all start hanging out in the chat, I want to encourage you to go into that chat and let us know where you're joining from. I'm coming to you from Toledo, Ohio. This is land that was indigenously cared for by the Fox, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi tribes in my area. So feel free, let us know where you're joining us from, or if you know whose land you're on, shout it out in the chat there. I'd love to see how far our global audience spreads. Now, if you have questions for the speaker, please feel free to keep sharing them. I see we've got a couple people already chiming in the chat, which is excellent. If you have a question that you want to ask that you want to be kept anonymous, no problem. Just DM your question to me. You can find my name, Meg Alexander, in the drop-down menu. I'd be happy to ask your question and keep you anonymous. Oh man, we've got St. Louis, Missouri. We've got Georgia, Texas, Colorado, Detroit, Courtney, not too far from me. Santiago, Chile, South Africa. Y'all, we are like crossing the world today. Love it, love it, love seeing all of it. Thank you so much, everybody, for chiming in. All right, now, last but not least, if you do have questions, like I said, please feel free to send them in whenever. We're going to be going over a lot of the questions that you all submitted during today's event. So if we are going over your question, please feel free to chime in the chat. If there's extra details you think we should know, context, maybe we're just not attacking the question from the direction in which you intended it. So please feel free to chime in here. We want to make sure that this is an open conversation and y'all get exactly what you came to get out of today's event. Now, I want to introduce you to today's speaker. His name is Gus Nordhielm. Now, Gus is a full stack engineer working on human and AI pipelines at AWS. Now, hold on here. There we go. Sorry. Gus has worked in web development for the past 6 years across multiple industries and is passionate about staying close to users and their feedback, as well as developing tight-knit collaborative teams. Gus, we are so happy to have you here with us today. Is there anything else that you want our audience to know about you before we dive into questions?
Well, I'm so happy to be here too. No, that about covers it. I'd love to dive right in.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will get down to the meat and potatoes of today's event. All right, so one of the first things that we got asked, and a lot of people asked this question, could you tell us what a typical day looks like as a software engineer?
Sure. So I think like with any job that sort of changes depending on the day. So I'll give you like today. Today was sort of half being on meetings, talking about work I could be doing, half doing the actual work. And the actual work tends to look like you're either reading or writing code. So if I'm reading code, I'm doing a code review. Somebody wants to make a change, say to we have an interface for basically you feed in a PDF and a machine learning model tries to tell you basically what the structure of the PDF, tries to do OCR on all the fields in it, identify where there's signatures. And we have a special user interface for kind of correcting the results of that. So I was doing a code review where some changes were being made to that interface. And then after this, I'll probably spend a little bit of time making my own changes to that interface. We need to add a feature where you can actually, if you look at the results from the model, it's basically like there are these what are called bounding boxes around certain fields, and we need to be able to adjust those. So that's work I'll be doing, which might involve looking up some details of this library Convo we're using to basically it's a canvas library. So for any kind of intensive 2D graphics, that's what we're using. Yeah, so that was today, but it does change.
Okay. I like hearing that. I think, that's absolutely something pretty common that we hear is like, oh, a typical day. Well, it depends.
It does.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the industry as a whole. If folks are trying to consider a career pivot into coding, how should they go about analyzing if that pivot is the right thing for them?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of questions to answer in there. I think maybe the first one is, do I like this? Like, is this exciting to me? I think I didn't, when I started coding, I was kind of like, this is a thing that like people who are good at math should be doing, or like people who are just have something I don't have should be doing. And the decision to like, start messing around with, I think the first things I learned how to do were just mess around on my terminal and like print some text out and shove it in a file and move stuff around. And literally just that sort of boosted my confidence a little so I could start to see what the next thing to learn was. And I just started getting excited. So I think that's what you should look for. I think you should look for something that being able to code would enable you to do that you can't do now. For me, it's usually I want to be able to make something that'd be cool to see this app or whatever else in the world. So I think that's the best starting point. It's just, do I think I would like this? Is this exciting to me?
Now, when you were getting started, did you get into it because of the coding aspect or because of the industry in which you wanted to use those coding skills?
It was not the industry for me. I actually didn't think that was, I didn't think I could code, and then I didn't think I could get a job coding. I think the reason I learned was I wanted to build a portfolio site for myself. I had done some like okay graphic design work, and I thought I could maybe get a gig doing that. And so I wanted to make like a nice portfolio site for it. So it was like I wanted to make a specific thing. And then also I think there's like, the way we relate to a lot of the technology around us is just there's a little part of my brain that's just like, well, that's magic. Like, I don't need to know how that works. That's magic. And I think there was a little bit of a desire to, specifically with like web apps, to just kind of know a little bit more to, still, I've been doing this for 6 years. A lot of it is magic. The biggest, new thing, I think, large language models, I'm learning, but it still feels like magic to me. But that is a really strong pull for me. It's like, I don't want to have this just uncertainty about how this thing works. I want to get in there and have, even if I don't understand it truly end to end, have just a little bit more than it's magic. Yeah.
Okay. I like that idea. I do want to highlight or remind people, there's a link that just got thrown up in the chat here. If you are interested in what a career change into coding could do for you, you can sign up for a free info session with General Assembly. There's a link in the chat thread for where you can go there. It's ga.co/PTF-career-in-coding. So if you guys need that sent out again, please let me know. I'll keep dropping it in the chat during today's event as well. All right, so one of the things you started talking about is languages, some of the languages that you picked up. What do you think are key languages that people should focus on learning first if they are looking for or looking into this option for them?
Yeah, so my specific order was Bash, which is kind of the language you write in the terminal. So shell scripting language. I don't think I got very deep with it, but there are a few commands that it's worth memorizing. That's probably the first thing you're going to encounter. From there, I did some work in Python and then some work in JavaScript. If I was just answering this question with one word, it would be JavaScript. Like, I think that's the most portable language. You can invest a lot of time learning it and you'll be able to do most things. And so I think that's a good starting point. There's a great learning resource by like Dan Abramov and Maggie Appleton called Just JavaScript, which is totally something I wish I had when I was starting. In part because it's a little bit more focused on like developing good mental models for like how to fit these things in your head. They're very abstract, and so building a little bit of intuition for what you can do and like what things you can't do. I think that's a hard thing to do with anything super abstract, which programming can be. But yeah, short answer is JavaScript's the place to start.
Okay, I like that. Is there any language that you've picked up that was fun but not really useful?
I did some class and we use this language that I think is probably used in academia or like academia where you're learning computer science called like Racket or something like that. Which I told people to ask what I was using in this class and they wouldn't recognize it. So yeah, I wasted a little bit of time there. But no, I think everything I've learned since then has been useful in some way. Yeah.
That's good. I love that. Okay, so let's kind of look forward, right? Based on your experience, things that you've been doing, are there any coding languages that you think will continue to be in demand, especially as we're looking like 5-10 years down the road? Now, obviously, nobody has a crystal ball, and 10 years ago, I don't think we would have suggested half the things that we're doing now. But based on your experience, what are you seeing to be like kind of long-term value things that people will still need?
Yes. So I can't attribute this quote, but there's a quote out there that like anything that can be written in JavaScript or ported to JavaScript will be. And I found that to be true. So I think that basic knowledge will still be useful. I think that probably we'll start to see more. I don't know if anyone has messed around with maybe Dolly or Stable Diffusion, where you type in some text and you get out an image. If you're learning a conventional programming language, the kind of path from I want to do something to it's happening involves a lot of like error messages where like things just go wrong and you fix them and then you have the thing you want. But with these like image prompting solutions and even with ChatGPT, the cycle from I want the thing to I have the thing is a little bit more like you immediately get something out. It's never an error, but it's sometimes just wrong or not quite right. And so you're tweaking it. I don't think that in 10 years, it'll be possible just to not learn a programming language and just start there. But I do think that we'll see some like pseudo languages in the middle where you do write more plain English, and building the like skill and intuition around figuring how to get what you want out of a large language model might actually be a useful one to pick up. I guess that's what a prompting engineer would do. I don't know if that'll be a really big job in 5 or 10 years. I think some hype will die down and then we'll find out what's really useful and whatever else. But yeah, beyond that, I think the general categories of writing stuff for the front end and writing stuff in the back end will still exist. I would say that the skills within them might get more specialized. So if you're a UX engineer, like a front end person who also does design work, you might be writing less code and doing more graphic design work. And then similarly on the back end, I think there's going to be a lot more, I don't think like DevOps stuff, like building the architecture that can handle huge volumes of traffic. I don't think that's going to be the first thing that's automated away. So I think that there'll be a little bit of specialization, depending on which track you choose.
That's a very good point. A lot of the conversations that we had couple of weeks ago at our tech summit were based around AI and around like, what ethical coding means and what empathetic AI can look like. And that was definitely very high up on the chat, subject meter, was like, what jobs do we think might disappear and what might become, a new job because of this.
Right.
And you're right. I mean, like, we're standing at a precipice, and I feel like people in necessarily like the millennials and younger age range are starting to see these changes happen faster and faster. And so, like, yeah, it's a big watershed moment, but it's not like, oh my God, there's this thing called the internet and it's going to be huge. You know what I mean? Like, we're kind of we're still on large steps, but they're not seeming quite as like cliffs like they used to be, I think.
Right. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about some of the kind of logistics, right, of career pivoting. A lot of people are starting to consider things in terms of transferable skills, right? You might come from a background that is completely unrelated to coding, but there are still, skills and tasks and things that you are able to do that are transferable. In your experience, what transferable skills really make you stand out, to people who are hiring?
Yeah, I think the primary one is just the thing that got me coding in the first place which is just it's not a comfort with learning new things. I think every time I don't know something, I feel incredibly uncomfortable, especially if I need to do it to do my job. I really actually hate that feeling, but I seem to manage, make it through that feeling and come out the other side over and over again. And I don't really think it's going to get any easier. And I'll probably, lose the willpower, whatever it is that gets me through at some point. But that skill has served me very well. Just kind of saying, this thing seems impossible to me right now, but I feel like there's a first thing I can try or a first step I can make, and that'll take me somewhere. So I think, I'm not sure how you describe that as a skill. It's probably something really simple, but one word that I can't think of right now. And then the other thing is, I think, the step beyond that, which is, you're sort of willing to tolerate, I like being a self-starter. Thank you. That's what I was prompting for. So the second skill, though, is kind of like not biting off more than you can chew, not writing checks you can't cash, basically. Because I think you learn a lot, you feel like, okay, I can do anything. And then you sign up for more than you can do. Everybody seems to do this.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah, right. That's the balance of it. I think that second skill that's really transferable is, I think the skill broadly is being able to set reasonable expectations, being able to sign yourself up for a reasonable amount of, I'm going to learn a new thing in a certain amount of time or figure something out in a certain amount of time. But for me specifically, like my personality, I really love to be the person being like, yeah, we're gonna do that thing in 10 minutes. It's gonna be bug free. Like, let's go. Like, I would really love to say that to everyone. And so just figuring out why it's so hard for me to be like, actually, in real life, that'll probably take like 2 weeks. And if that bums you out, I'm sorry. That's my best judgment. So that is another important skill.
Yeah, I think that is something I as a very, very recovering people pleaser myself, that is a very hard thing to do, right? You want to deliver for people. And I think you're right. That is a really good thing to think about, and not just in terms of like, being a self-starter is important, obviously. And it's very, very a useful skill that you can apply to many different jobs, industries, whatever. But yeah, having that healthy sense of your own limitations, or of like the realistic logistics of how this is all going to go and how long things actually take. I mean, like, it's a skill that I thought I had 5-10 years ago. I'm only just now realizing it, that like, oh, no. Now I really have it like within the last 2 years. And, cause like everybody, you think like you said, oh, I can get that done in 10 minutes. It'll be fine. But I don't know about you, but as I'm picturing that, I'm like picturing the 10 minutes, and I don't realize that that to get there, I have to have basically a utopia around me that's going to handle everything else. No more distractions, no getting pulled elsewhere. Do you think that comes with the territory? Like, do you think that that's something people might have to like reestablish once they move into a different field? Or do you think that being aware of your limitations, or being realistic with your time, is something that can carry pretty well from field to field?
Yeah, I think that one's definitely a transferable skill, because it feels very interpersonal, and it feels, the communication around it is interpersonal. knowing how to make estimates is kind of self-knowledge and based on your own expertise. But I think, yeah, the way to think about it is like a person is asking you for information and you just need to give them the best information you have. The everything around it is kind of incidental and usually goes away as long as the information is accurate.
Very good point. I like that. Okay. We are getting a couple questions in from the chat here, so I'm checking, or I'm grabbing all of those. So I'll be fitting them in as they fit with, you know, our larger kind of framework here. But please keep sending them in, y'all. If you have a question, ask it. It is the only way to make sure that we get to your question today. Ask early, ask often, and that way we can make sure that the time that you spend with us and with Gus from General Assembly is good. So, okay, so let's talk about how to present this information. If we are, you know, coming in, we're pivoting in from a different field, and we want to try and you know, present ourselves well, how should we present experience from a different field as you're trying to make that pivot?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think first thing everybody thinks of is like, let me go in and figure out what transferable skills are there and make sure those are highlighted on my resume. And I think that's good. Do that like in your little blurb, pick things that would be relevant to a tech role. I think everybody has their own path in the tech. And I actually like, from like the time I was like 13 to 18, I was working in restaurants. And like the last restaurant I worked at was this place called Alinea that's like very fancy. Like there's a Chef's Table episode about Alinea. And because the first tech jobs I was looking for were in like Silicon Beach and Silicon Valley, and they're just these sort of well-to-do people with VC money going to fancy restaurants, they recognize that restaurant and they're like, huh, that's kind of cool. You know, this person climbed their way up the food service chain. And like, I definitely had a few phone screen calls where people started there and thought that was kind of neat. So if you can do something or have done something in your industry that anybody knows about, that's at least a good starting point. And I think it's one of those things that makes you stick out. Like, you know, probably when I was in the stack of resumes, people did not remember my name. My last name has too many vowels in it, so they're not going to. It's too Scandinavian. But they may have remembered like, oh, there's this kind of cool detail in this person's history. So I think if you can find that cool detail that just, you know, anyone, even outside your industry would know about, I think that helps. Yeah.
Okay. Now the example that we got when we were given, you know, when somebody submitted this question, they were talking about transitioning from marketing, and they were trying to present that experience in combination with their very recent education, you know, in front end development. So if people are coming out of, you know, you're coming out of a boot camp, or maybe you went back to school, if your education is still fresh, is there a way that people should be positioning that, you know, in terms of a pivot? Or do you think that you know, new grad is new grad, like, as you know, that all of these things are created equal, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, I should acknowledge the limitation here. Like I didn't really pivot. Like when I pivoted into coding, it was sort of, you could squint at it and say, maybe this person's just coming out of college. And so I didn't have like a career I was really like, I mean, I had this food service career, but that hasn't helped me really, except for the name recognition thing. So if I had like a whole career in marketing or something like that, number one, I think that's where you're like, if you went to school, like that's the school you went to, that's what you're gonna see on the resume. And I think it's very common to see resumes where there's a career transition in there. And so maybe there's nothing special you need to do. I think you just need to demonstrate that you got things done, you were competent in this field while you were in it. One advantage you have, though, is like you have just made this huge decision, this big change in your life. And so probably you have more clarity than a lot of people who are just coming out of college or who've just been on this track for a long time. You have more clarity. You've had to articulate it more recently. Like, why am I doing this thing? What's exciting and what's interesting? And so I would like reach back to, why did I do this in the first place, and see if you can pull that into, you know, a cover letter or a personal statement, because that tends to be pretty compelling.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, I like that idea that not only do you have experience of like being a person on the planet for longer than you know, most new grads would be. I do very much appreciate this idea that like, well, yeah, because I'm pivoting, I've clearly thought about this a lot more. I've had to try and figure out not just like, here's my blank slate, where am I going to go from here? but okay, this is the path I've gone to up till now. Now I'm going to make a complete shift. What am I still taking with me? So
Yeah.
I think that is really, really interesting and really important. Okay, let's talk about your personal experience. When you were landing your first role in tech, what did that look like for you? What was the process you went through? How long were you at it? What did that look like?
Yeah, so like I said, there's this disclaimer that I think that my path is going to be different from anyone else's path, but my specific path was, I did this self-teaching to build a portfolio site. I was very nomadic at the time. I was kind of living in my car just because I could like hang out with some friends in Colorado and code in a coffee shop, and then I ended up in Santa Monica for a while. And like the next step I took was basically, okay, do I want to spend money on GA, on a boot camp? And I think that was in part, like I wanted to do that in part because I just wanted to know if I was learning real things, like if the self-teaching I had done was like correct, and I could apply these skills in the industry broadly. And then the other component of it was like, I want to be around other people who are figuring this stuff out and learning this stuff and struggling with this stuff as well. And so that was a big step that I was happy I made. And then ultimately, like that led pretty quickly into my first job. Right after I graduated, I was just spending all my time like writing up resumes and redoing my portfolio site because I just learned how to do that really well. And just churning out job applications. And interestingly, like GA in Santa Monica at that time, which I don't think the GA in Santa Monica is still open. I think there's one in Central LA, which I'm sure has a relationship with Lightstorm still, but they had a relationship with the place where I got my first job. And so Tim, my first boss, like had figured out that there are cheap developers to be had coming out of these boot camps. And like he was confident enough in his interviewing ability that he could kind of pick out the ones that would fit well and wouldn't be overwhelmed at Lightstorm. And I was fortunate to be one of those. A couple people ended up getting hired from my cohort, which was sort of lucky. But I don't know if there's like a theme to be taken from that. It's just sort of like, moving from isolation to being around people, moving from isolation to context. I think that was the most important move I made to actually get that first job.
Okay. Do you have any advice for people who are about to finalize their boot camps? If they are, either just signing up for one, like picking the one they want, or if they are just about to finish?
If they're just signing up, I think that's like, I take a little break because you're about to be working really hard. There's definitely some pre-work in most boot camps, and if there's a thing you're working on, keep working on it. Like there's not much for you to do that. Like you've signed up for the boot camp, do the boot camp. If you're just coming out of it, I'm sure you'll get a lot of instruction about like how to apply to jobs, and you'll probably just be doing that a lot. Usually there is also some like you can go to like social events and stuff depending on how big the city you're in is, and that's a nice counterpoint to just like shooting resumes off into the void. That does not feel good, honestly. And you kind of I think you should do it on autopilot a little bit. I think staying connected, and also if you're just coming out of a boot camp, like yes, you want a job, but also like you have these amazing new skills now. Like you can make like really cool shit probably, and I highly recommend making some time for that, especially if you're feeling a little bit inundated in the like I feel like I haven't broken through yet, and I need some reassurance that the things I've learned can make an impact. I think proving that to yourself can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. We had a question we had some people that had written in questions during today's event. One of them, this person had questions about like building the digital resume or building a portfolio website. Could you expand a little bit on like what that was like for you, what, where you did this, what people should know?
Yeah, I mean, the content of the website, the first time I did this was going to be like little graphic design work I had done. And I actually like really wanted a PA job at this company called Leica. They do like stop motion. They made Coraline and Box Trolls. I'm sure they're making something else now. But for some reason I was like, they're in Portland, and I like really wanted to get a job there. And so the way I made my portfolio was basically super tailored to that because I had this idea for how it could be really cool. They do this thing in modern stop motion where like they 3D print each of the mouths for the characters doing different things. And, you know, they 3D print like different props in different states and they'll have these trays of them. So I was like, it would be really cool if the website was like a tray and each thing in the tray was like related to a skill that I had. And like that idea was just very fun to me. And I also aesthetically wanted it to be like a photograph. And when you hovered over things, there'd be like a light would come in and shine on it. So I ended up doing this in a really hacky way where like I just like took a photo and then I held my phone light here and took another photo. And the site like loads really slowly because it's these high res photos and it's, but the idea kind of gets across. So that's kind of what I mean by, you know, making your portfolio site into a project or something exciting. If there's some idea in there, something you'd really like to see or you haven't seen before, or that you have seen before and want to see if you can do, I personally just find that really motivating. So even now, I'm right now my personal site is really lame. It's worse than that, and I'm redoing it now, and I'm trying to use it as an opportunity to like deepen my knowledge of large language models. Basically, the idea is I'll have little posts in it that kind of cover projects I've worked on, or you know, even just like little stories from my life, and I'll be using like a vector database to kind of come up with plain English prompts that kind of direct you through everything in there. And like that's the thing that's exciting to me now. So I think your personal site can be just the first place you pour out your creativity. Not to make this answer longer because it's already been very long, but also your personal site needs to be a place with like your email and your resume and stuff like that. And I mean, you can throw that up pretty quickly and with a template. So there's nothing wrong with doing that in the meantime while you're working on your magnum opus. Yeah.
Now something I am not within this realm at all. It's one of the perks of my job is I get to talk to people about stuff that I have no idea what they're talking about. So while I'm listening to you talk about this, do you think that it's more important to build your portfolio or build your website in a way that looks completely different, that sets it like totally apart from everybody else? Or do you think that it's more important to get the information up there and not necessarily worry about being so incredibly unique in every single way?
That's a good clarification. Like there's something really cool. There's this like confidence to you go to some developer's site who's been working for 20 years and it's just like plain text. It looks like Craigslist. You're like, wow, that is a confident person. So try that. Like that's how it comes across to me. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen somebody not get a job because of their personal site. So you can start there. But it is an opportunity, right? If you wanna express yourself a little bit more in there, do it. The
but
thing
you don't
I would
necessarily
caution,
need to reinvent the wheel to get people to notice.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. We did have another question that came up during today's event. This person said, I've completed a boot camp, but cannot get a job to save my life. Internships all require being enrolled in a traditional school format. Entry-level jobs require 12 years, not kidding, although the low end that I've seen is only 3 years of experience. Should I give up? So this is a large question, right? Obviously, we don't really want to tell people to give up ever. But you know, being that these are kind of the things that people are running into, what would you do if you were in this person's position?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have been in this person's position, and it's like a really shitty position. I feel for you. It's also a very common position. It's I think most people have to go through this. I also did not get a traditional degree, and so yeah, I think that a lot of those routes were cut off to me as well. Internships for sure often will be connected to a college degree in some way. That's where I kind of get back to making sure you're kind of engaged in your community. There are, I think my first job at Lightstorm Entertainment, it was just all boot camp grads. It was chaos. It was great. So that was a really good thing. If there's a company near you who is looking for boot camp grads, you need to find them somehow, and that and be like networking locally. Generally, that vibe is going to be a company that does something else that's like building out an IT team. So looking for IT positions, weirdly, sometimes when companies are building a new dev team, they kind of don't have a distinction between information technology and like actual coders and scripters and stuff. So sometimes those IT jobs are a little bit more like a way in. I wonder, like, I know that GA has like a platform where you can just kind of list yourself on the GA platform. So people looking for bootcamp grads will go there. But like, there are definitely people looking for bootcamp grads and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you should give up. I also don't think that you should let yourself exist in like a, I don't know, weird limbo where you're perpetually like, this is the one thing you need, and there's no other way of nourishing yourself. I think you should find other things to keep yourself sane, and you know, remind yourself that you can do things, and your whole life isn't just going to be putting yourself up for review in an industry where it's very hard to get noticed that first time. So I don't know. I hope a few of those things are helpful, but yeah, I think do keep going. If you're burning out on the like being on job boards and stuff like that, make it more in person, find more in person events, you know, find human ways of actually getting in there. But yeah, there's a grind to it.
Oh, of course.
It's
Well, and I love
tough.
the IT
Yeah.
advice, because that kind of seems like it harkens back to, I remember what I was told, you know, 1,000 years ago when I graduated college, which was, if you want to get a job someplace and you can't get the job you want, then everybody's always hiring in the mailroom. So it was that idea of like, okay, well, you're fresh out of college, you don't have to support a family, blah, blah, blah. You can, you know, work for meager ducats at some mindless job because it gets you in the door. But I like that idea of like, no, you don't have to go back to the mailroom. Like, look at IT, because you might have the skills that you've picked up to survive in that role, or at minimum get your foot in the door to be like, hey, are you also looking for people that can do this? Because this is what I'm really interested in.
Yeah, I love that way of putting it. Yeah, you don't have to go all the way back to the mailroom. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. So before we leave the boot camp idea, is there any advice that people should remember if they are just about to finish boot camp? Like, don't forget to do blah, blah, blah.
Don't forget to stay in touch with the people you were in the boot camp with. Honestly, a lot of those people will. Oh yeah, that's another piece of advice. Like, I've worked with so many people. I worked with my teacher from that boot camp. Like, stay in touch with those people. Uh, I think that's the only thing to remember to do, because sometimes it can feel like, okay, now we have to go be out in the real world.
We're free.
No, like this was yeah, no, stick with these people. Yeah.
Okay. All right, now let's talk about kind of you know, a comparison between how did your boot camp experience differ from like day one when you got to a new job and were being hired? What were some of the differences there?
There in the boot camp, most, like, you look left, you look right, they also don't know what they're doing. And then you go to your first job, you look left and you look right, and they seem to know exactly what they're doing, and that can be very intimidating. So I think the biggest difference is moving from an environment where it's like kind of okay to not know, to an environment where everybody's kind of pretending they know. And I think you can start wondering, like, are they pretending? Does everybody just know everything? They don't. And you'll learn faster than you think. I think that's probably the biggest difference. There's like, you're still showing up having to like learn new technologies and frameworks and stuff, and you know, you started a new company and they have their way of doing things, of architecting their apps, and that learning feels very similar to what you were doing in boot camp. So in some way, you have kind of that muscle exercise ready to go. So that's one thing that there is in common. And then also in boot camp, you're a little bit more like, if it's project based, you're doing everything. And once you actually get to a company, okay, like there's a designer and you're just building like the comments interface or something. So it gets a lot more focused. I think that's a bit of an adjustment too.
Okay. All right. So let's take a step back here. What should people be analyzing before starting a boot camp? How can we tell if a boot camp is the right fit for us?
I did like some low commitment things with GA. Like I took a Python class with them, and most boot camps offer that. Find something that's like actually useful on its own, not just like a uh, you know, let us walk you through our portfolio of boot camps. I think that's fine. Do that, but like to evaluate the place, find something that's going to give you a skill right out the gate. There are a lot of places doing like the basic web technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Like let's just do an hour on that, and that can be a really useful hour. So that's a great thing to look at. It is an investment, so make sure that's a good investment for you. If you can't make it, you're not dead in the water by any means. Especially if you're willing to be a little bit more social. And like, I have a friend who is personally, I am not the most like networky social person in the world, but I have a friend who's a little bit younger than me in San Francisco right now, and he's like living in a house with a bunch of like just random startup founders, and like there's like a good energy there. And he broke into the industry without doing any boot camp or anything like that. Anyway, bit of a tangent, but yeah, I think just validate that this is a place that can teach you. And then also if you have like people you can go into it with, I think that's really nice. That can be really helpful. If you know somebody on day one, that can be really good. Yeah, I think those are the main two things. Like the thing that I did in my personal story that I would 100% repeat is doing a couple of these like Python learning events, just one day events. And sometimes they cost money, but it's usually worth the information you get.
I like the idea of starting with something that's kind of low lift and a bit more focused. Seems like a really, really good option than, trying to dive in head first when you might not really know what area that would really, kind of suit you, or maybe not even really knowing where you want to go once you're done with boot camp.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
One question we got in, and I think I already know the answer to this, but do you think it's that someone can really learn to code in just 3 months?
Yes is my short answer to that. Like you're always like, you're never at a finished state. Like I've been working with JavaScript and TypeScript for a while now, and I feel pretty confident, and like I got some moves, but like I don't know anything about generator functions, and I don't really need to. This is the second time I've name dropped Dan Abramov, but he has this blog called Overreacted, and he did this wonderful post. So Dan Abramov is like sort of the closest thing we have to a rock star in the front end ecosystem, front end world. And he wrote this great blog post just called "Things I Don't Know," and it was great. And like there are just a million things that this very successful developer really never learned. And so that feeling of there's a bunch I don't know, it starts there. It starts at the end of those 3 months, and it continues indefinitely. So yeah, the basics of coding, how do I work with arrays, and how do I represent things in the real world in code, and how do I write things that are reasonably performant, and how do I come up with like, how do I distinguish between that is a thing I can solve with an app versus that is not, that you can definitely lay down in the first 3 months. Yeah.
Okay. We do have a question in the chat wanting to know the name of the blog post again. Could you drop that for us?
Yes, can I put it in the chat after? Because like, yeah, I'm on my phone right now, so it's a little challenging.
No, if you can just tell me, you said it was Dan Abramov?
Mm-hmm. The site is overreacted.io, and then if you search something like "things I don't know," the specific post should come up.
Found it.
Hell yeah! Thank you.
All right, I'm dropping the main blog post link for you all there, and you can search within it as well. All right, awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, let's see. Let's talk about experience. So like one of the people that had just chimed in was talking about how they were just getting ready to finish it with a boot camp. What is your advice for gaining technical experience before you start actually applying to roles?
I'm just going to repeat myself. Like make shit. Like the portfolio thing I was talking about. You would be shocked how much you learn when you're not trying to learn. Like when you're like, I just really want to make this thing happen. I guess everybody.
Yeah, I mean, like nobody sat down with a handbook and was like, "Oh, how do I use Instagram?" We all just kind of like messed around and pushed some buttons and posted some really stupid stuff and took it down and then figured it out, right?
Yeah. Felt cute then, but you know, often we delete
Right,
later.
delete later.
Yeah. Yeah. And like beyond that, I think Instagram is a great example because like it got a lot of people excited about like making moody, artsy photos. And I think that's great. I think that's very similar to what it's like to put together your first app or something like that.
Do you think that it's worthwhile to try and do projects just for yourself, or do you think that doing projects for other people might be helpful as well? I know I've sat through a lot of these, and certain things kind of stick with me and certain things don't. And one of the things that I have heard a lot is, obviously you don't want to volunteer your services because not everybody can afford to do stuff for free. But a lot of the recommendations or a lot of advice talks about looking for like a nonprofit in your area that might need something that you could do for them, like something, if it's a subject that you really care about. So like I like animals, so if I were coding, maybe I would want to create a better web page for for the local dog shelter or something. Have you done this in your past? Have you seen other people do this?
Yeah, that is such good advice. I like that especially because like that is also a great way of meeting people, and maybe so and so knows somebody who needs, a new website for the restaurant, stuff like that. I think the first thing that made me want to code was like I was working in restaurants for the longest time, and I was working at this brunch place in Ann Arbor where I grew up, and like there was this, if you were the opening host, you would get 15 calls that morning, which was just servers coming in later in the day to ask if they're on the schedule. And I was like, there has to be a better way. And so like that was the first time I was like, oh, I could make an app that's relevant to this thing I know. And so right, if you're super interested in ecology, or you're super interested in zoology, yeah, I'm sure there's a way to get into that. I personally have never, I've tried, like I've emailed plenty of like movie theaters and restaurants about, do you need someone to redo your site? And I've never gotten that, that's never worked out for me, but I know plenty of people who that totally did work for them. So I think that's a great practice for sure. I would say like be protective of your learning space, and don't like there's an inflection point where really you should be asking for money for things, and then that's, you need the money and you deserve it, and like don't shortchange yourself. But there's also a point before that where like the exchange is, I will give you website, you will give me flexibility, and so just kind of know which one of those things you're doing.
Okay, I think that's a very
Yeah.
good point. Yeah. There are people in the chat asking if the recordings will be available to watch later. Yes, hell yes, always with Power to Fly. I'll throw more info in the chat in a little bit, but you can always find our past recordings on our website. There's all of our archives are stored there. And then our this live stream, we're live streaming to YouTube right now. The recording will be posted there within about 5 to 15 minutes ish of the end of the live stream, so you should be able to rewatch it there faster. All right, let's talk about imposter syndrome. Have you experienced this either pre-transition, during, after? Is this is imposter syndrome something that you have personal experience with?
What's wrong with being an imposter? I think
Just because
yeah,
you managed to hoodwink everybody, people act like it's a bad thing. It's like, no, I am apparently very good at convincing people I know what I'm doing.
yeah, what an amazing skill. That's a better skill than knowing how to code. Geez. Um, yeah, I've definitely dealt with imposter syndrome. And honestly, that's kind of the attitude I've adopted now. Like, um, either I do belong here and I am good enough, which I feel that way sometimes, or like, wow, I'm really good at climbing ladders and getting places I don't belong, which is also kind of cool. And I think neither of those things is fully true, but I think that if you are a self-starter, if you have some hustle, like there's a little bit of that, like I'm gonna get places I don't necessarily belong in there, and I think that's actually a great thing. I tend to really connect with my coworkers who kind of have that ethic, that kind of like,
Yeah.
let's see what this is like ethic. So yeah, I deal with imposter syndrome. It's not going away. If you need a way of like just clamping it down and holding it down, just go, yep, I'm an imposter. There are worse things to be.
I guess. Yes, I
Yeah.
absolutely love this. And that's one of the things that you have to think about, right? Like, not to get too like metaphysical, like our reality is what our brain creates, blah, blah, blah. But like, this idea of imposter syndrome is all about, I'm not good enough to be there. It's
Hmm.
not, they told me I'm not good enough to be here. It's, I think I'm not good enough to be here. So,
Sure.
one of those things that I talk with my therapist about all the time is like, okay, this is something that I believe is true. Who told me that?
Mm-hmm.
Did somebody, or did the meat sack, or like, well, the potato clock that's running my meat sack, like tell me that that's a thing? So I very much like this idea of like imposter syndrome's not the worst thing in the world. Just because you think it's true, A, doesn't make it true. But B,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the worst thing to be. It's not a moral failing if you somehow convince people that you know what you're doing. How
Yes.
do you navigate with some of the anxiety that is created with a professional pivot? Because you are quite literally saying, I am leaving everything I know currently, or everything I've developed or gotten good at, to go try and do something else. How did you navigate the anxiety that comes with that?
Yeah. Denial, which is not like, I'm not prescribing that for anyone. That's just how I dealt with it. Uh, and then also went to therapy. But like when I was at the end of like working in food service, like I got this job at Alinea, and it was like a lot of chefs like at the top of their game are there, and it's a really competitive environment. But it was like really burning me out, and I was not very happy, and I was kind of feeling this like panic of this is not for me. I need to get out of here. What am I going to do? Um, and I do think I went into a little bit of a survival mode, just kind of looking for whatever could be next. So it's, yeah, that anxiety can be pretty extreme. Um, I was also like, 20 when I was making this transition. And so uh, I think that part of everybody's life is full of anxiety and uncertainty.
Oh God,
Um,
like all of my 20s were anxiety that I did not realize was anxiety. Like, yeah,
exactly.
because you're constantly
Yeah.
sure that like everybody's ahead of you, or you're not doing the thing you're supposed to be doing. And I think that's true for everybody, whether or not you're on a path or not. I
Yes.
don't know.
Yeah. I think the real answer to that question is about how do you how do you tolerate anxiety, and uh, still working on that. So to each their own.
Well, and I very much appreciate your recommendation, your advice earlier when we were talking about, kind of that slog of like trying to get your first job, is like remind yourself that you are a person who knows how to do things. You are not just this being that keeps asking people things and saying no. It's you do know how to do things. And I think that you, like you said, kind of reminding yourself of that like, yes, you're new at this and you suck at this now because you're new, so you're supposed to. I think that that's really important advice, because you are battling that anxiety is just as much about the external, what's going on, are you finding a job? How many resumes have you put out? All that kind of stuff. But it's just as much about the internal of like, are you being nice to yourself? Because it doesn't
Yeah.
sound like it.
Yeah, there's this complicated thing too. Like if you're the person who wrote in with the question about like, should I give up? I'm trying everything. Like sometimes the message you can get from that is like each of these individual rejections is somebody saying, "Nah, you're not good enough." And I think you will not survive if you take that on. Like it's more likely, it was between you and another person, or somebody just didn't even see your resume, or they're like resume screening robot is an asshole. Like there are just so many things that can happen that are not really connected to you. So yes,
Mhm.
not hanging your sense of self-worth uh on those rejections, I think is very important.
Yeah. And I think this is also one of those situations where I don't think people compare the two necessarily. I think they compare them more often, but also like in the wrong ways. Like looking for a job is like dating. Like you're gonna be at a no until you get a yes. Like it's just one of those things. And learning that resiliency is important. But like you said, kind of maintaining that sense of self of like, yeah, those people don't like me, but I like me. So somebody else will like me. Like that seems like a very like it seems like something that's kind of silly and seems maybe tangential, but it could really help the core of your search of like maintaining that urge to keep going out there and keep asking.
Yeah, in
Um,
the sense that there is a good fit out there. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Tanya had asked in the chat here, there's so many companies that I want to ask, would you like me to fix all the typos on your sites and job advertisements? But figured it's probably better not to. If Tanya was asking this question of me, I'd tell her yes. Like, go ahead and send
Mhm.
that email. Say like, hey, I found like 15 typos. Here's the first three. Would you be interested in paying me to fix the rest? And see what they say.
Yeah, I don't think there's really a downside to that. If you can make it sort of like a playful email instead of a critical email, I think that helps. But yeah, I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
If
Yeah,
I got
Monica's
that
chiming
email
in
and most of
too.
the, yeah.
Yeah, Monica's chiming in too, saying I message companies about bugs all the time. I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
All right. Last question I want to touch on. Are there any free upskilling resources that you recommend? One of the things we hear a lot about is like not necessarily like do it for free first, but like don't throw good money after bad. So like see what you can
Yeah.
learn for free or low cost to start with. What do you recommend for people?
So there is a newsletter I subscribe to called bytes.dev, like bytes, like with the y.dev. And they will often link like really good blog posts and like free learning resources. In terms of like learning the basics of JavaScript, I think the first few chapters of just JavaScript is free. There's just a lot out there. I think if you literally go on YouTube and go like, R basics or Python basics, I tend to learn through videos. And so that's definitely out there. I know that's not the most insightful or, I'm not the only person who can give you the answer. Google it, but you'll find a lot more than you might realize. I don't think you need to spend money right away. Yeah, I like that bytes.dev resource because it's a little bit more practical and in the weeds. The resources I use, there's this guy, Michael Hartl, Hartl, and he has this series called Learn Enough. I think he does like sliding scale pricing if you can't spend money. But I think his resources do cost money now. They didn't when I used them. But that was literally the first tutorials, the set of tutorials I went through. He has them on like topics and increasing complexity from like using the command line to writing simple apps. So yeah, that Learn Enough series is really good. But unfortunately, I don't think that's free out of the box. I think you have to see if he'll help you out.
It looks like there's a 7-day free trial. Yeah, I just grabbed a link for you. I'll put it in the chat thread.
Oh, yeah, you
okay.
can do some damage in 7 days. I think that's worth. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Last question I want to touch on. This one got thrown in the chat real quick. If you are in the interview stage, but stuck in the interview prep phase and semi-procrastinating because you can't remember all of the commands and best practices, how do you know when you know enough to like fire off the resume and try and get an interview?
Oh, use interviews to practice. I know that sounds silly, but like, I guess if you're in a position where it's like, okay, somehow I got this one interview, what am I going to do? Then basically my advice is like simulate the interview environment. So if you can get a friend to literally ask you questions, that's another thing. Like if you are in a big city, there are other people who want to pretend they're in an interview. Do that with some strangers. That's really good. That really simulates it well. But I have always, when I'm looking for a new job, I have interviews that are practice interviews. Sometimes you get lucky and one of the practice interviews ends up going very well. But there's kind of I've never found interview prep and doing the leak code questions prepares me because it's just your brain's in a different place when you're in that interview.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you're prepping, record yourself. If you can't talk to somebody else, like ask yourself the question, but record yourself so that way you can watch your stuff back. And while you're prepping, put shoes on. It's the dumbest thing, I'm telling you, but there's something about wearing shoes. Your brain automatically thinks like work mode. It's so dumb. I'm wearing them now. I'm telling you. And I don't wear shoes in my house. I have a pair of shoes that I put on when I go to host because of this. It's the dumbest like mental brain hack. It's ridiculous.
That's so good.
Thank you. All right. So last but not least, I want to make sure we've highlighted this a couple times here. You can sign up for a free info session with General Assembly to learn more about what a career change into coding can do for you. So I'm throwing that link again in the chat here. You can also get some more info about General Assembly on their Power to Fly page. I threw that link in as well. I'll make sure that I grab that again. Is there anything you want people to remember? If they leave today and they only remember one thing, what do you want it to be?
This is the thing most people can do, coding. It can be a great outlet for creativity. And there are a lot of free resources for actually like just taking those first steps. I think those are big things.
All right. I love it. Thank you, Gus, so much for joining us today. It was really, really nice to get to know you and get to learn from you a bit. We really, really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Meg.
All right, y'all. Don't forget, General Assembly is absolutely there for you as an option when it comes to boot camps and kind of getting your feet into the world of coding. So absolutely take a look at that. If this was your first Power to Fly event, I am so happy that we got to meet you today. If you are one of our frequent flyers, it is always great to see familiar faces on these events. I hope you have a safe, happy, healthy, wonderful rest of your Wednesday and week and weekend in case we don't see you before then. And cannot wait to see you on an upcoming event. Bye, y'all.